Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And then I gotta share. And then I gotta go to the, where'd it go? There it is. Okay, so this is the quadratic formula. Do you have access to a calculator that has the square root button? Like on your phone, if you turn it sideways,
That's what I'm looking at right now.
you should have one.
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Okay, good, because that's going to be absolutely necessary.
Okay.
If you don't have it, then it won't help. But anyway, so what we've done so far with solving quadratic equations is we've solved by factoring, by the greatest common factor, and by factoring, to x plus 2 and x plus 4, and then x plus 2 equals 0, x plus 4 equals 0. But some of them don't factor. So you have to have other methods of solving, and the quadratic formula will work to solve any quadratic equation. And I always tell my students that, and they're like, well, then why do we learn any other method? And you can see by looking at the quadratic formula here that there's a lot to remember and a lot of places to plug numbers in incorrectly and to calculate incorrectly, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of times it'll be easier to factor it because it'll be really quick rather than to use the quadratic formula every time. Underneath the radical here, underneath the square root, this b squared minus 4ac, that's called the discriminant, and it tells you how many solutions there are. The maximum number of solutions, because a solution is where it crosses the x-axis or touches the x-axis. The maximum number of solutions for these quadratic equations is 2, because that's the most times it could touch the x-axis. It doesn't have to touch it, or it can touch it once. But if this under here, the discriminant, this b squared minus 4ac, if it is a positive number, that means there are 2 solutions. And that's because this particular, if it's b squared minus 4ac, if that's a positive number, that means that it's a parabola that hits the x-axis twice. If b squared minus 4ac equals 0, there is 1 solution, in which case if we graphed it, it would look like this, where it only touched once. And if b squared minus 4ac is a negative number, that means there are no real solutions. And when you get to algebra 2, you'll learn about imaginary solutions. But what this graph would look like, it might look like this, where it doesn't cross the x-axis like that, or whoops, that one, like that, something like that, where it doesn't cross the x-axis or touch it at all. Okay, in a minute we'll work with the discriminant, but let's see how the quadratic formula works. And I'm going to show you using the quadratic formula, and then I'm going to show you how much easier it would be if you just inspect it and see if you could factor it. But the quadratic formula, the solutions are the opposite of b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, all of that over 2a. Now, the a, b, and c, a is the number in front of the x squared, b is the number in front of the x, and c is the constant when the equation is in standard form. Because if you look at number 2, it's not in standard form. The 18 is over on the right, has to be equal to 0, so the 18 would have to be moved over to the left. So to find out what the x's are, since b is negative 12, this means the opposite of that. So when I plug in positive 12, plus and minus square root. This is square b, or b squared. Since b is negative, it has to go into parentheses. Minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 20. All of that over 2 times a, which is 1. Okay, so you can see there's a lot of places for error in using the quadratic formula if you determine that's all I'm ever going to use. So then we're just going to simplify. I'm going to simplify underneath that square root. Negative 12 squared is positive 144. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4, times 20 is negative 80. 2 times 1 is 2. Okay. Haley, zoom. Yeah, I had to zoom it too, just like you. Okay, sorry. All right, 144 minus 80 is 64. Okay, and we just keep simplifying. The square root of 64 is 8. So what this helps us as is that plus and minus, that represents the two different solutions. One of the solutions is 12 plus 8 divided by 2, which is positive 10. And the other solution is 12 minus 8 divided by 2, which is 2. So using the quadratic formula, we get that the solutions are 10 and 2. So that's quite a bit of work. Let me show you real quick. X squared minus 12x plus 20. If we would have tried to factor it, look for two numbers that multiply to give 20 and combine to give 12. That'd be 10 and 2. They're both subtracted. So our solutions much shorter, much less room for error. Do you have a question about that one?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So number 2, like I said, it needs to be equal to 0. So we're going to move the 18 over. So we write it as 2x squared plus 9x minus 18 equals 0. This one would factor. Okay, but we're practicing the quadratic formula. Remember, it's the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So this time b is positive 9. So when I go to plug it in, it goes in as negative 9 plus or minus 9 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 18, all over 2 times a, which is 2. And then we're just going to simplify. 9 squared is 81. 4 times 2 is 8. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8 times negative 18. It's 144. So it's 81 plus 144, all of that over 4. 81 plus 144 is 225. So the square root of 225 is 15. Our two answers are negative 9 plus 15 divided by 4. Negative 9 plus 15 is 6. 6 over 4 is 1.5. Our other one is negative 9 minus 15 over 4. Negative 9 minus 15 is negative 24. Divided by 4 is negative 6. Those are our two solutions. Let me show you real quick how fast it would have been to factor. I say it was fast. 6 and 3. Yep, 6 and 3 plus minus. So that one would have been easier to factor. Okay. Number 3. Now, number 3 Okay, first of all, we need that 25 over there. So 10x squared minus 5x minus 25 equals 0. Okay, this one also would factor. Now, what might be easier, you can always divide everything by 5 to make the number smaller. Maybe easier for you to deal with, but if you're using the quadratic formula, you don't have to do that. So 10 is A, negative 5 is B, and negative 25 is C. So the opposite of negative 5 is 5, plus or minus the square root. Since B is negative, when you square it, it goes in parentheses. Minus 4 times A, which is 10, times C, which is negative 25, over 2 times A. Negative 5 squared is 25. Negative 4 times 10 is negative 40, times negative 25 is positive 1,000. 2 times 10 is 20. Sorry. Okay. And Ian, will you check to see what the square root of 1,025 is?
$32.02.
Exactly?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so since it's not exact, this is how you have to work this. You have to, and I got to get my calculator. One of the solutions is 5 plus the square root of 1,025 divided by 20. And the other one is 5 minus the square root of 1,025 divided by 20. So in order to calculate this correctly, after you type in the numerator, you have to hit equal before you divide by 20. So let me see here. I don't know where my calculator went. So let me get my calculator out. So you do 5 plus square root 1,025, hit equal, then divide by 20. And then you'll have to round to the nearest whatever it says. So one of our answers, I'm going to round to the nearest tenth, is about 1.9. The other one is 5 minus the square root of 1,025. You have to hit equal and then divide by 20. Let me make sure that's right. 5 minus square root 1,025 equals divided by 20. The other one is about negative 1.4. You have to hit equal after you type in the numerator. Okay. Number 4, it's got to be equal to 0. So I'm going to move that 20 over, which means I'm going to add that to that 10. So 3x squared minus 4x plus 30 equals negative 20. I'm sorry, equals 0. So A is 3, B is negative 4, and C is 30. So the opposite of B means I'm going to do 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared minus 4 times A, which is 3, times C, which is 30. All of that over 2 times A, which is 3. Okay, negative 4 squared is positive 16. Negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. Negative 12 times 30 is negative 3. 2 times 3 is 6. 16 minus 360 is negative 344. And when you type into your calculator, square root of negative 344, it's going to say error or domain error or something like that, which means that there's no real solution because you can't square root a negative. Okay.
Lord.
Does that make sense? Okay, so let's look at number 5. It says the demon drop at Cedar Point in Ohio takes riders to the top of a tower and drops them 60 feet. A function that approximates this ride is h equals that equation. Okay, it's quadratic because of that square, where h is the height and t is how long, or the time in seconds. How many seconds does it take for riders to drop to 60 feet? Okay, so instead of it being x equals the quadratic formula, it's going to be t. T equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, 64 is b, so negative 64 plus or minus the square root of 64 squared minus 4 times a, which is negative 16, times c, which is negative 60, all over 2 times a, which is negative 16. Sixty-four squared is 4,096. Okay. And negative 4 times negative 16. That's why that messed up. Okay, 4 times 16 times 60 is negative 3840. 2 times negative 16 is negative 32. So 4096 minus 3840 is 256. And 256 is a perfect square. So square root of 256 is 16. So one solution is negative 64 plus 16 divided by negative 32. So that's negative 48 divided by negative 32. So that's 1.5. Okay. The other one is negative 64 minus 16 divided by negative 32. Which is 80 divided by negative 32, which is 2.5. Okay. So these are the times. Okay. If we're talking about the way this graph looks, it looks like this. And here is the 60 feet. One of these is 1.5, the other one is 2.5. And it says, how long did it take for it to fall from the 60 feet? So it took half of the time. Huh?
Oh, I said,
Well,
never mind.
it took one whole second for it to go up to 60 and then back down to 60, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So it only took half a second for it to fall. So it took half a second. Do you understand why it was half a second?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, then number 6, we're just using the discriminant, which is the b squared minus 4ac to determine the number of solutions. So our answer is either going to be 1 solution, no solution, or 2 solutions. It's going to be the answer. It says state the value of the discriminant. So we're going to find the answer to the discriminant, and then we're going to say whether that means 0 solutions, 1 solution, or 2 solutions. So b squared, so that's negative 9 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times 21. So that's 81 minus 84. Negative 4 times 1 times 21, which is negative 3. Since negative 3 is the value of that discriminant, if that value is negative, that means there's no solution, no real solution. You can't square root a negative. So for B, so we have negative 11 squared minus 4 times 2 times 10. So that's 121 minus 80, which is positive 41. Since it's a positive number, that means there are 2 solutions. And then we're going to move that 16 over. Negative 16 is going to be positive 16 when I move it over. So C is positive 16. So we have 24 squared minus 4 times A, which is 9, times C, which is positive 16 now. Twenty-four squared is 576. 4 times 9 times 16 is 576. 576 minus 576 is 0, which means there is 1 solution. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you have any questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Well, poor Cade